Hello YouTube, and welcome back to another book review from me, your host, Logan Albright. Today I'm dipping back into the works of Anthony Burgess. I've been on a big Anthony Burgess kick for a while now. I'm sure you've noticed. Been reviewing a lot of his books. I've kind of resolved to read everything that he wrote, which is going to take a while because not only did he write many novels, he also, a lot of them are also out of print and hard to get. So when I go to used bookstores, I try to pick up stuff by him. You can't really find his work in new bookstores apart from A Clockwork Orange, but in used bookstores you can. So I try to pick them up. And one of the books I picked up, although this I did not get from a used bookstore, got this from Amazon, is his 1974 novel, Napoleon Symphony, about the life of Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, there's a lot to say about this book. First of all, the book is based on, its structure is based on the symphony by Beethoven, the Third Symphony in E-flat major, the Eroica Symphony. And if you don't know that symphony, it's a great symphony, and Beethoven dedicated it to Napoleon, and it's called the Eroica Symphony, and it's supposed to be, something celebrating him. But over the course of writing the symphony, Napoleon crowned himself emperor, and Beethoven was outraged by this. He saw it as an affront to democracy and as a move of a tyrant, and he scratched out the inscription, the dedication to Napoleon, and so it's sort of half dedicated to Napoleon. And it's in 4 movements, and this novel's in 4 parts, and the novel is loosely based in structure on that symphony, which is sort of appropriate because Burgess was himself a composer, a pretty accomplished composer, not nearly as famous as he was as a novelist, but he was pretty successful as a composer as well. And so he has a real musical ear, and he's got a real musical ear for language. The other thing interesting about this book is that it was written, and it's dedicated to Stanley Kubrick, the director who adapted A Clockwork Orange famously. And apparently this book was written as a draft to try, or at least the first part of the book was written as a draft for a screenplay, because Kubrick always wanted to do a film based on the life of Napoleon, and he couldn't find a way to do it. He couldn't get a screenplay he liked. So Burgess sent him the first part of this book as a suggestion. Kubrick found it unsuitable for filming, which I completely agree with. It's very unsuitable for filming, and couldn't use it. And so Burgess then expanded it into a novel, which he published in 1974. Where to begin? First of all, let me just say, I struggled with this book a little bit. I am not an expert or even a moderately knowledgeable person on the life of Napoleon. I don't really know that era very well. I don't know the events, the military history very well. So a lot of the characters in the novel, I didn't really know who they were. It certainly doesn't hold your hand. It doesn't explain very much what's going on. It kind of expects you to know these things. And since I didn't know these things, I found it a little hard to follow. Another reason I found it a little hard to follow is that Burgess is a huge fan of James Joyce, and I am not a huge fan of James Joyce. I don't really enjoy his work, but you can really feel the Joycean influence in here, particularly in the first part of the novel. It's very kind of stream of consciousness. There's a lot of dialogue without dialogue tags, so you don't really know who's talking. He's really trying to focus on the music of the language and all these different themes weaving in and out of each other. And the effect of that is kind of cool, but in terms of comprehensibility, it makes it a little bit difficult, especially if you don't know that much about the history. So I struggled in that regard. But I want to talk about a little bit the structure a little bit more, because he does kind of explain what he was going for. He's got a long poem at the end of the book, about 20 pages of poem or something like that, where he kind of explains his ambition in the book. And it's a very ambitious book. And he talks about how the different movements of the book correspond to the movements of the symphony. So the first movement is, heroic, allegro, fast-paced, energetic. And the first movement of the book, the first section of the book, is kind of chaotic. It deals with Napoleon's military adventurism when he's, not yet emperor, when he's a general, and all the conflicts that he gets into. And it ends with him being crowned emperor by the Pope with this kind of big, illustrious, finale. Kind of goes along with that first movement. The second movement is a funeral march. The second part of the book is much more subdued, a lot easier to understand, a lot quieter, a lot more reflective. You kind of get that in not only the content of the book, but also the way it's written in the structure. The third movement is a scherzo. The third section of the book is a little bit more playful. It involves this elaborate comparison of Napoleon to Prometheus, which I found a little bit strange. He talks about that in the final poem as well, how he sees a parallel between these two characters. And then the final movement is the finale, and it kind of deals with his exile to the island of Elba, at the end of his life and his declining health and things like that. So it kind of deals with the finale of his life. And I found that section really interesting. I like that. Burgess has a great ear for language. He has a great ear for prose. Some of the sections in prose in here I found very beautiful and very striking. He's just a great writer. Again, his Joycean influences are not something that I really enjoy. I like a little bit more of a straightforward approach to writing. But, there's certainly moments of brilliance to admire in this work, for sure. He paints Napoleon as a character in a little bit of a contrasting way. Kind of early in the novel, I feel like he kind of paints him as a little bit grotesque. He actually describes him in the final poem. He describes him as heroic yet grotesque, I think. I think those are the words he uses, heroic and grotesque. You kind of get that. He's, you get deep kind of sordid details of his love life, his mistresses. He seems small. He seems petty in a lot of ways in the beginnings of the novel. But towards the end of the novel, when he's kind of resting on his laurels, he's been, defeated and exiled, but he's still got this kind of presence about him. He's got a nobility. He's painted with a little bit of heroism and a little bit of nobility. And you can see the sort of a grudging admiration for Burgess for Napoleon, which as an Englishman, Burgess is an Englishman, I'm sure his relationship with a French general is a little bit complicated because the English and the French historically don't get along so well. So that's interesting. He paints kind of a complex picture of this character where he's alternately sort of, a tyrant and disgusting and not very admirable, but there's something about him. There's an air of heroism, an air of nobility about him as well, which I found quite interesting. So I would not call this one of my favorite Burgess books that I've read so far. I found the structure challenging. I found it a little overly ambitious. I found my own lack of historical knowledge an impediment, which is not Burgess's fault, obviously. It's my fault. But still, from my subjective reading experience, I have to take that into account. But if you are someone who is a fan of the Napoleonic era, and if you are someone who enjoys the works of James Joyce, you might really enjoy this book because it's the kind of thing I could see myself dipping back into in the future, maybe if I learn a little bit more about the man and his life, because there's a lot of beauty there, there's a lot of music there, and I think it's the kind of thing that you could benefit from reading twice, where you really kind of immerse yourself in not just the plot, not just the characters, but the real sound of the prose, the music of the prose. I think that's something that would be rewarding to people. But overall, not my favorite Burgess novel, probably one of my least favorite Burgess novels, if I'm being honest, but certainly not a bad book, and there's a lot to appreciate in it, and I certainly admire the ambition of it as well. So that's what I thought of Napoleon Symphony. If you were sick of me talking about Burgess novels, I'm going to be taking a little bit of break from them for a while. I've got a couple other things coming up on my list, so we'll get to different styles of books, different genres of books coming up pretty soon, so just stay tuned for those. I do release a new book video every Wednesday, so make sure you subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, and come back to see those. If you have read this book, I'd love to know what you thought about it in the comments below. If you have read any other works of Burgess that you'd like to recommend to me, I've done his final novel in verse, Burn. I've done Kingdom of the Wicked. I've read Clockwork Orange, but I didn't review it for the channel because I read it many years ago. And I did Earthly Powers. So if you want to recommend other Burgess books, I'd be happy to hear those. In the meantime, I'm going to get back to reading because I got lots of work to do. So thanks so much for watching. I've been your host, Logan Albright, and I will catch you next time.